Alright, here we go, episode 2 of our Chronicles of Drunagor. Now I know what you're probably thinking. You're painting an expansion miniature. And yeah, that's what I wanted to paint. This is one of the first pictures that got a hold of me when I was looking at the Kickstarter. And I really wanted to paint this, so I'm going a little bit out of order. Sorry. Leave a comment below of what you want me to paint. Whatever people request the most, I'll paint that next. So leave a comment. Give it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button. Come on, let's go. That way you can request what you want. Whatever people tell me if they want to see the dwarf or the warrior or the paladin next, whatever people request more, I'll paint that next and put a video out. So do that. All right, without further ado, let's go. Alright, first step, you're going to scrape off those nasty mold lines. If you need any supplies or what paints I use, look in the description below. I list everything down there. After I scrape everything off, I'm going to spray it with Mechanicus Standard Gray Spray Paint, followed by a white spray paint, Corrax White from above. You don't have to use those specific colors, that's just what I use. And that's going to be our zenithal highlighting to start it off. I'm going to use some sticky tack on top of an old spray paint can cap, and I'm going to stick it on there before prepping. Off camera, I prepped it, and then I'm going to take some Praxeti White, which is a dry paint from Citadel, and I'm just going to highlight our top portions with a dry brush all over the top of the miniature, the face, really getting places that if the sun was directly above the miniature would make it more light or lighter than it already is. The first contrast paint I'm going to work with, and yes, I'm going to be using a contrast paint for this entire miniature until we do the highlights, and the reason I'm doing this is to save time, because if I was going to do it with some regular base paints, it would take me forever. With contrast paints, it really speeds up the process, and you can make it look very decent without a whole bunch of work. So we're going to use Aggaros Dunes, and if I'm pronouncing these wrong, I'm sorry. Some of these names that come up, I have no clue how to say them. So we're going to use that on the front of our miniature. While it is still wet, we're going to do a little bit of wet blending on those sides. We're going to be using Plaguebearers Flesh. I do know how to say that one. And we're going to use this on all of the side of our miniature and the face of our miniature. This is kind of a nasty green, zombie-like color, but we're going to wet blend those two colors together, and so you want to basically get those two to kind of make it look like they're one and the same, and it's nice transition from the brown to the green. And while we're doing this, if you get a little bit on the place here or there, or the spikes or the sand dune that it's ripping out of, not a big deal at all. It's part of the process. This miniature doesn't have to be perfect. We're not trying to make it look perfect. We're just trying to get it so it looks really good to put it on the table, and it increases your value of your game, and meaning it's funner to play. Nobody likes to play games with unpainted miniatures. If you do, I'm sorry. For our mouth, we're going to use Volpus Pink. Be a little careful. You don't want to get this on the teeth. I accidentally hit one of the teeth. If you do, go back over it with some Screaming Skull or Ushabti Bone or whatever color you have that's a bone color. So just be a little cognizant while you're doing this. And we're just going to do the inside of the mouth. For the hard shell of our miniature, we're going to use Gore-Grunta Fur. Now for this, I switched to a bigger sized brush. Obviously, we wanted to cover as much surface area as possible and as quickly as possible. So I switched to a larger brush. If you get it too much in one area, just go back over it with your brush after you've gone over a dry area and soak some of that back up to make it, you know, less pooly. You don't want to pool it all the way to the point where it looks like a pool. You just want to get a little bit in those recesses and move on to the next spot. Make sure you're getting underneath the scales or the hardened shell if you're looking at it from straight on. For our sandy bits or our dune, whatever we're looking at, we're going to use a little Nazdreg Yellow. Now, obviously you can see portions of this sand is coming up our miniature, so you need to use a little bit of a smaller brush. If you get a little bit on that brown, it's not a big deal. You can't really see it that much, but we're going to work in all of that yellow completely around. Now, if you're looking at it, you can obviously notice that there are some skulls on our sand portion. If you get some on, it's not a big deal. We're going to go over here with some skeleton horde here in a minute, and then we're going to go over it with a highlight, so it's not that big of a deal. If you mix it in there, it just adds to the flavor. Don't worry about it too much. For all of our nice little spikes and bones, we're going to use a little skeleton horde to include the teeth as well. And like we said in the last step, if you got some on the spikes while you were doing the sand portion, it's not a big deal. Just go over it with this. It's almost kind of the same color. It's definitely got that same tone as the yellow, so it's not that big of a deal. And just be a little careful. You don't want to get too much onto certain areas you don't want to. But as you can tell with the spikes that are in the mouth, you're going to mix it a little bit with that Plaguebearer Flesh. Again, not a big deal. It's going to blend in just fine once it dries. It adds to the overall transition of our colors on our miniature. While you're waiting for everything to dry, you might as well let the base dry. So we're going to use some earth texture of Vallejo. Use whatever you got. I'm trying to get it as close to the sand color or dirt color as I can get. I'm not using brown. I'm just using some nice earth texture. Now, if you want to take a break and let that earth texture dry, I said F it, I'm moving on. I'm using some Screaming Skull on all of our bone bits. Now, this is going to be the most time-consuming portion of painting this miniature, as it's going to take some time going over. It took me about 2 coats with each thing. And when you're doing the teeth, the bones, the spikes, all that, you don't want to cover the entire miniature. You just want to take off little bits and pieces. You basically just want to get a nice contrast from the older color that's painted over to the color that you're currently putting on. So you don't want to do the whole thing. You just want to get nice little bits to kind of get that transitional tone. And as you can see in the video, I'm just picking out little pieces. I'm not going too crazy on it. I'm just picking out little bits to make that tone transitional. I'm also picking out the skulls. Now, when you pick out the skulls, do not get into the eye sockets of our miniature. We basically just want to get that, draw an outline of each skull while we're doing it. I missed a couple spikes when I was going through it, so I had to go back and redo some spikes. It kind of looked like the sand dunes, but you can differentiate between the two if you really look at it. To highlight up our bone bits just a little bit, I'm using a little bit of white scar, another Citadel color. And for our teeth, I'm just doing the very end portions of our teeth. For the spikes out of the mouth, I'm doing just the end portions, and that's just going to kind of build up our contrast from the skeleton horde to the screaming skull to the white, and we're just built up our colors just a little bit. I'm doing the same thing with the spike portions that are sticking out of the sand, and obviously that are on the spikes that are on the back and the side of our miniature. Again, you don't want to overdo this color. You just basically want to make it look like, oh, it's a sharpened spike on our miniature. Just make it look a little bit more believable as bone. We're going to highlight up our mouth now, and the first color we're going to use is a little pink horror from Citadel. And we're just going to hit all of our raised areas inside of our mouth. We don't want to go crazy with it. We just want to get those contrast colors from that dark Volpus Pink to highlighting up with this color and Emperor's Children that's coming up next. So do a little bit of edge highlighting on the side where our teeth are on the left and the right hand side, and the gums, and obviously that nasty hole or whatever is in the middle of our mouth. Looks like something else that I won't say. And we are just highlighting those areas up. And then we're going to take some Emperor's Children, and you don't have to do everything you just did. Just pick out some spots on the raised areas to highlight up just a little bit to give it that nice contrast, ugly looking mouth. To highlight up our skin areas, we're going to be using some Nurgling Green, and we're going to make this thing look nasty. Just nasty. We want to hit all of our raised areas. You want to keep that nice Plaguebearer green mixed in with that Nurgling Green to have it that nice two-tone transitional look. I'm hitting up a vast majority of raised areas, and I'm just using this all over the place. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I am just picking out spots, putting some Nurgling Green on, and moving on. I like how it looks with the Nurgling Green and the Plaguebearer Flesh, the two colors, and how they mix well together, where it's almost like a rotting flesh versus an old flesh. And I am just picking out little pieces as I'm going around, and again, not doing anything like, oh, it needs to be done this way. Just pick what you want. And if you want less is more, that's fine too. Or if you don't want to do barely at all, you don't have to do that. And while you're doing this, why don't you head over to our Instagram at nerd.nights and subscribe to our channel over there, as we are constantly posting new content, upcoming miniatures we are painting. Send me a message over there. I like to see the miniatures that people have painted. Send me a picture of your miniature. I like to see the work that you guys do. It really motivates me to do more videos, so please stop by and do that. To highlight up the front portion of our miniature, we're going to use a little Balor Brown, and we're just going to hit those raised areas. Obviously keep the recesses dark, and we're just going to basically build up some brown little blotches in our area and make them look a little bit more poppy, I guess you could say, or make them stand out just a little bit more. For our back shell, we're going to dry brush on some Golfang Brown. I tried to do some edge highlighting at first. I didn't like how it turned out, so I had to switch to this. This is just going to bring it up just a little bit in color. We don't want to make it go crazy. Just bring up that color just a little bit so there is some contrast from the light and the dark. And to highlight up our sand areas, we're going to use a little Zamesi Desert, which only makes sense. And we are going to pick out lines and raised areas on our sand. Now again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. I am specifically just picking out some raised areas, doing some edge highlighting of some other areas, and just making some of that contrast from our original contrast paint stick out just a little bit more. As you can tell with the contrast paint, there is a two-tone variant to this color. There's like a yellow, and then there's like a dark, very dark yellow, I guess you could say. And mixed with the Zamesi Desert, you have a three-tone look, and it looks really good. And if you have already been painting this, and you know you have not put a ton of time into this, and it already looks fantastic, but I'm just adding this just a little bit to make it just a little bit more extra for the tabletop. And as you're watching this, you can tell I'm just going around picking out little bits, doing some highlights here and there, leaving some where in the recess where I believe it looks like shadowy, or where the sand might have been darker in this area. And I'm just going through. I'm not going crazy about it. I'm just picking out little areas here and there. Now that our base ground is dried, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to dry where I live. I'm going to hit that up with the dry brush of Tyrant Skull, and this is going to highlight up our ground to make it a little bit more sandy in that area. If you wanted to go over with the Nazdreg Yellow, you could, and then hit it up with this Tyrant Skull, but it's totally up to you. I'm then going to keep on with the sand and use Tallarn Sand to make it look more of a sandy base for the edge of our miniature. Again, if you get some stuff on the side of it, no big deal. It just adds to the overall flavor, which is a good flavor. And here's your base completed, and it looks pretty good, I think. And here is your miniature completed, and it looks effing fantastic. Look how good that thing looks. You did. Oh, God, I'm so proud of you. You did such a good job. You rocked it. Completely rocked it. But hey, thank you for watching. If you're a subscriber, thank you so much. Leave a comment of what you want to see painted next, and I will pick whatever you want. If you are not a subscriber, man, hit that subscribe button. Let's go. Let's do it. Come on. You got nothing to lose. You're watching the videos anyway. Let's go. Let's build this channel. But other than that, all right, paint on.